This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 396, Drupal Security. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about Drupal Security with Mark Shropshire and Benji Fisher. Mark is a creative leader with a heart for helping individuals be their best while working with teams delivering best-in-class software projects built with open source technologies. He works at Media Current, an open source product company, and also leads and organizes several development-focused tech meetup groups in Charlotte, North Carolina. He maintains various Drupal modules and Garter, the Drupal security distribution. He lives in Concord, North Carolina area with his family. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Also joining us again, Benji Fisher. Benji has been contributing to open source software since at least 2001 because it makes the world a better place, and he hates the idea that someone else might struggle with a problem that he has already solved. He recently started working at Tagline Consulting, a major Drupal contributor and development agency. Benji is a member of the Drupal usability team, a co-maintainer of the Migrate API, and a member of the Drupal security team. He also maintains a few small contrib modules and lives near the Boston, Massachusetts area. Welcome back to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here again.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are, as usual, John Picozzi, solution architect at EPAM.
Hello, internet friends.
And also joining us for the next 4 weeks, Jordan Graham, senior developer at Atten Design Group. He has been working with Drupal since 2011 and with Atten Design Group since just before COVID began. Jordan is the father of 2 adult daughters and is getting married in 2024. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Best wishes.
Thanks.
Where are you getting married, Jordan?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Because she is from Paris. And so there's a bunch of Europeans that we want to have join us. And honestly, I don't know anybody from my side of the family that would mind going to France for a wedding. So I don't know, I'm sort of angling for France.
How about Iceland, halfway in between?
Could be.
I don't feel like anybody's ever called Iceland the city of love, though. I just don't feel like that's accurate. So I can understand wanting to go to Paris.
Okay, and now to talk about the module of the week, let's bring in Martin Anderson Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. This week, I thought we would talk about the CrowdSec module, which integrates your Drupal site with the open source CrowdSec security engine, a collaborative malicious activity detection and remediation tool. So it's actually quite a new module. It was created in December of 2022. Currently has a 1.0.1 version available, and obviously is in pretty active development at this stage with the one version that works with both Drupal 9.5 and Drupal 10. It has 2 open issues. Technically, one of them is postponed, a support request and a feature request. And it's currently in use by just 30 sites, and it was created by Jürgen Haas, who also created the ECA module that we previously covered here on Module of the Week. The module works by leveraging sort of a security network. So when you think about something like Cloudflare or Akamai, a significant part of the value that you get from them, using their WAF solutions is really sort of that network effect of being able to detect malicious actors and sort of in a distributed way protect anyone within that network, so that you don't have to wait until your site individually is attacked before that bad actor can be sort of isolated from everyone behind that. And so CrowdSec is really intended to be kind of an open source platform that works the same way, so that sites again can share that data, and then so in a distributed way identify those bad actors. Now, the CrowdSec service does offer enterprise plans, but no account is required to start using the module. And there are really sort of 2 parts to the module. So one is really retrieving that list of known bad actors from the CrowdSec API and then blocking them from accessing the website. But it also does some signal collection for the network by detecting bad behavior. So it can be things like triggering flood control, maybe crossing a threshold that's configurable around 404 errors. And it will also work with other security modules like Perimeter, which again, we've previously talked about in the segment. The IP addresses of bad actors identified locally will then be sent upstream to the CrowdSec service and shared globally. And worth noting as well that the site builder can control which of those signals are going to be shared upstream, and also that list of IP addresses cached locally for performance reasons. So let's talk about the CrowdSec module.
I've not heard of it, but it's actually really cool. And right now, I am mesmerized by the animation on the crowdsec.net website. I recommend everybody go there, right click on that, and just look at the SVG. It is wild. But no, I think this is a great tool. I mean, like you said, one of the nice things about being on either those CDNs or even any of the big Drupal platforms is a lot of the platform level stuff gets taken care of a lot quicker, right? You don't have to worry as much about um, as much about platform level attacks because Pantheon or Acquia or Platform Sage, they're gonna harden their system against this stuff a lot sooner than a lot sooner than I would if I'm managing a server myself, right? It takes time to manage that, and when it's just part of the institution, it takes a little bit of that burden. So being able to, this is kind of the first thing I've heard of where even smaller sites can contribute back rather than just kind of consuming it. It sounds like that reporting feature is really kind of unique to it. So definitely gonna be checking this out and seeing if it's something that I can convince a lot of my clients to start using. Because yeah, if they can start contributing back to other people in an open source way, why not?
Yeah, some people listening to the podcast may remember years ago, I think Dries had started a service called Mollum that I think
Oh, yeah.
had some overlap in terms of it being that idea of kind of an open source sharing of, who are the bad actors that should be blocked and so on. So not 100% clear on how this one is different from that. It sounds like where that one may have been more adopted by the Drupal community, this sounds to me like it's meant to be more sort of agnostic in terms of the kinds of sites it'll work on.
I still miss Mollum. It was great.
So I'm curious, what's to stop someone from reporting legitimate IP addresses as bad actors?
It's an excellent question. It's something, to be honest, I had also sort of wondered about. I mean, I feel like it's not the same sort of level of threat as something like DNS spamming, where it's going to take a site offline. It would potentially block people from an organization. Let's say if you could block, certain IP addresses by potentially sort of nefariously reporting them as bad actors. So maybe there's a potential for abuse. To be honest, it's a good question, and one that if somebody listening to the podcast has an answer for, we'd love to hear about.
They do have a page that talks about how to get yourself removed from their block list. So if you have been blocked, there is a way to get yourself removed. And that makes me wonder if like Akamai or Cloudflare has that same thing. I just happened to find it as you were talking about it. So it's not, particularly hidden. It's pretty prominent. But I imagine that some of their value add and some of the cost is probably just that management. How do you make sure that you're not blocking people inappropriately? Again, thank you, Martin, for an on-topic module of the week. Another interesting one for the books. See you next week. Okay, so moving on to our primary topic. Let's start with you, Mark. But why do you care about security?
Yeah, I like that question. Earlier in my career, I've had a couple of technical roles in higher ed, doing IT and development and leading teams there, and then also at a basically a graphics print company that used Drupal to drive all of its marketing automation and print automation as well. This was large scale printing. And so, as you might imagine, higher ed institutions are a target for, the bad sorts, that might be trying to attack a website. And at the same time, at the graphics print company, we had to actually comply with various audits. We were 20,000. We're ISO 27001 back in that time frame, compliant, and that's a pretty big task to undertake. So that led us down the road of like lots of review of security. And it's not that Drupal wasn't secure to begin with. It's really just enhancing it so that we're passing audits and making sure that we are secure in a way that we can, go to the auditors and say, hey, this we're doing what we say. That's what we like to do.
And one of the things that people may not realize, but print shops can be particularly vulnerable, because one of the things that print shops need is to accept printable files, which can very often be zips or PDFs. So you generally have some sort of form or way for people to upload typically higher risk extensions. And so there's a lot more surface area for attack there than people might think.
Are you suggesting, Nick, that most print shops don't just accept emails from folks that say like, hey, I need this printed, here's the email with the attachments? That's not.
Oh, they absolutely do that. I mean, but if you have a form on the website, they generally accept that too. And so as a developer, it's definitely something you have to think about, because you can't stand in the way of them doing their business and their customers, meeting that business, but you need to make sure that they can be secure and protect them. So Benji, I'm going to turn that same question to you. Oh, why do you care about security?
I think that's sort of a hard question to ask, because like doesn't everyone care about security? And like, think about the movie Star Wars. And Luke Skywalker starts off and he's a farmer, right? He doesn't know anything. And then he discovers that there's this vast conspiracy to take over the galaxy. Well, there actually is a vast conspiracy to break into computers and create botnets and create spam. And basically the question boils down to, who do you identify with, Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader? And, for me, it's Luke Skywalker. Thanks.
So, I mean, I think like a clarification there or an enhancement to what you just said, right? So as we illustrated at the beginning of the show, if you're a patron, you heard the pre-show, and we know people that store passwords on Post-it notes, and I'm sure I am willing to bet that every single one of us knows somebody who, their password's like password 123, or they let random people use their cell phone. So like, it seems maybe to us, because of what we do, that the question of like, why do you care about security is silly, because like everybody should care about security. But there are definitely plenty of people out there that aren't thinking of the security of, their systems, their devices, their stuff, right? So Mark, for you, it sounds like you kind of got into security because of the work that you were doing and the need to make sure that your EDU wasn't hacked or people weren't printing kind of malicious things. So Benji, what's the catalyst for you as far as like, well, what got you into thinking about security? Or was it just because you were building websites and you wanted to make sure that they were secure?
Okay, so first I have to make a little follow-up to the password 123 comment, because the other movie I could have cited was Spaceballs. Okay, but
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, how do they know my luggage password?
I guess what got me in is just that I've been contributing to Drupal for a while, and I'm aware of the job that the security team does, and I feel that I can help. And they agreed, which was a little bit of a surprise, but also a little bit flattering. That there is work that needs to be done. As Nick said at the beginning, I've been contributing to open source software for a long time because I want to make the world a better place, and this is some place where I think I can have an impact.
Awesome. So let's actually continue with you, Benji. And can you just give us some of your favorite tips for securing Drupal? I'm curious, like, what's the one thing that you're like, okay, everybody, you have to do these like 2 things or 3 things?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot, and one point I make is that the most important things are the things you already know, like dental hygiene, brushing your teeth. That will give you a longer, healthier life. Everyone knows that. Not everyone does it. Security hygiene, it's the same way. Everyone knows that you should not be writing passwords on Post-it notes. I'm sorry. So use a password manager. I've been using LastPass, which is problematic lately, but it's probably still better than writing passwords on Post-it notes.
Let me actually break in there and ask you a question. If you, as a LastPass user, right, is your recommendation for folks to like stick with LastPass and like tough through it, or is it you should go somewhere else when thinking about a password manager?
I'm afraid I have the same question and I don't know the answer, and I'm planning to move off LastPass.
I have an answer.
I haven't done it yet.
Okay.
I have changed my master password. I have changed all of the important passwords in my account, and I'm working on the hundreds that are left in there. But yeah, it's a hard question. Have they learned from their experience, and is every other competitor just as vulnerable, just we haven't found out yet? Or is there a serious problem with LastPass? Personally, I'm planning to get off, but I haven't done it yet.
I'd highly recommend Bitwarden. I switched a couple of years ago. They've been fantastic. One of the really nice things about it's open source, I believe. One of the things that's really cool about it, though, is you can self-host if you really want to. You can set up in a Docker container on your local network. I personally think that when it comes to such sensitive information, that's a little crazy because then you have to make sure that your whole network is hardened and secure, and there's a lot more that goes into that. But if you're looking for an alternative to LastPass that's pretty simple and just as cheap, free, Bitwarden was pretty easy to switch to. In fact, I think there's a way to export and import all of the passwords from LastPass to Bitwarden securely.
I knew when we went down this road that Nick would come out with a Linux-esque password management solution. Not that I think he's wrong. I mean, I think that's a great suggestion. I knew he was going to be the guy. So okay, Benji, let's go back to the tips. So hygiene, good password hygiene was your first one. What else you got?
Right, and if you're managing a site, if you're an administrator for a Drupal site, enforce good passwords. So passwords is one. Second point is keep your software up to date. So as we're talking, it's Tuesday the 18th. You should be aware that tomorrow is the 3rd Wednesday of the month, which means there might be a security release for Drupal core. Any Wednesday, there could be security releases for contrib modules. Be aware of the schedule, be prepared to update. That's just good hygiene, and I could say more about that, but
and sign up for the newsletter. If you'll get a notice on Wednesday which modules and if core was updated.
Oh, there's
and then
an
you don't
RSS
even have to remember
feed, my friend.
I mean, who uses
there's an RSS feed? We're on Twitter. We're on Mastodon.
Whoa! Time out.
I haven't used RSS feed in 10
years. Open source password manager, but you're not going to use the security RSS feed. I will tell you how it's useful, sir. it is useful by having it go into your Slack or your Teams or whatever, chat tool you use. So that way, when they come out, it goes ping and you go, oh, I got to update now because that module's on 50 of my sites and it's very, very broken and security prone. So that's how RSS helps Nick.
And let me give one more tip, which is that everything that makes good software is also good for security. If your code is readable, it's more secure. If you have people reviewing your code, it's more secure. If you don't have any code, that's best of all, which means you're using Drupal core and contrib modules rather than custom code.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. And I was at a talk a couple of weeks ago at Nerd Summit, and Mike Miles was talking about kind of deleting things from your Git repo. And one of the things that he talked about was just that like if you delete code, like that's a good thing because you might not open yourself up to a security vulnerability.
You talked about the most secure way of doing Drupal is to use contrib modules and Drupal core only. What are some common security issues that people might have with Drupal? Maybe writing their own code or implementing contrib modules poorly.
So the worst thing I've ever seen is I was reviewing some code for a site, and first of all, they decided they needed custom access control for user edit pages. Why? I don't know. Second, they left off a not. So anyone but user one could edit the user one account. And that gets back to what I said. If there had been a second set of eyes on that bit of code, if there had been unit tests for that code, it would not have happened. So, with custom code, we all make mistakes and we try to catch them, but you can make just silly mistakes like that. If you're not using the mechanisms that Drupal has in place for preventing SQL injection, if you're writing plain HTML forms rather than using the form API, then you're opening yourself up to a world of trouble. I often say that from a security point of view, a web CMS is one of the worst ideas ever, right? We say, here's a form on my website. You enter text into that form. What am I going to do with that text? I'm going to save it to my database, and then I'm going to build web pages out of it. And the hackers are going like this. Yeah, let's get started. So Drupal has mechanisms in place, and you need to know how to use them in order to avoid SQL injection and worse. I guess there's nothing worse than SQL injection. Well, remote code execution is worse.
And Mark, what do you think of when you think of common your Drupal security practices that people run afoul of?
Well, I mean, tagging on to some of the great things, and hey, Benji, I didn't get to say hello. We spend a lot of time at camps. I know. Drupal Camp Asheville, there's my plug for that. It's coming up this summer again, but Benji and I got to share some time there. So I think tagging on to a little bit of what Benji was talking there, I think just, using Drupal APIs to write your code, making sure that you're following those. That doesn't guarantee security, but it certainly helps with a lot of things that Benji was talking about, like SQL injection. And I love the topic that Benji mentioned there about, about using core and contrib and writing as little custom code as possible. Every developer seems to have their own opinion, and some developers like to write all kinds of custom code in Drupal for their projects. And then some folks are like, no, I'm going to use all core and contrib exclusively. And I think there's a nice middle ground for projects. But where this applies into security is, I think, is just poor module selection. Or we'll turn it around and make it positive and say good module selection. And you would say, well, how do you pick modules? And that's a topic in its own. But a few of the things that I like to look at is, the module usage, and are there stable releases of a module? Are there tests written for the module? What does the issue queue activity look like for that module? Does it seem like folks are involved and contributing and things like that? So those are some of the things that that come to mind when I think about Drupal and security. So
the custom module thing I think is interesting, because I always think of like I like to try to take like an 80-20 approach of like building Drupal websites. And I always ask that question when interviewing developers, because I'm like, okay, like if you're like a code cowboy and like just gonna code everything yourself, like that's the recipe for disaster, right? So like, hey, let's do 80% of those contrib modules and then enhance them with that 20% only if need be, right? I think that's a super valid point. What were you gonna say, Nick?
Yeah, I wanted to dive into what you were just saying, Mark, a little bit more. You mentioned module selection is important, but and this caught me up last week. In fact, I was got a new client, just did a fresh install of Drupal 9 because there's some Drupal 10 stuff that I know is not ready, but the project is, as soon as everything's Drupal 10 ready, it'll be upgraded. But installed the fresh install of Drupal 9 and tried to install Commerce and couldn't. Because Drupal Commerce depends on inline entity form, and inline entity form doesn't have a stable release yet. And vanilla Drupal core, of course, sets the minimum stability in Composer to stable, which is good in theory, but you can't have a semi-complex site that sets the minimum stability to stable. Like it just is not possible. So one of the questions that I have is, how do we, I guess, as a community, work towards convincing module maintainers to do full releases, so that we can get security. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but to get security coverage, to to have better, as Benji has pointed out, better code hygiene, I guess it would be, or security hygiene. Do you ever think about strategies around collectively moving towards a more stable release schedule, or is that something that you just think is never going to happen in Drupal?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a problem ever since I've used Drupal, what you just described, Nick. And so I think sometimes you have to look at, like, why would a maintainer not want to release a stable release? The most common reason that maybe we don't talk about in the community openly as much, but the thing that I think is actually there is that maintainers are a little nervous and hesitant sometimes about releasing stable because they know what it means. They realize the accountability that it puts on them. If a security issue is reported to the Drupal security team, they'll be flagged. There'll be expectations to have it fixed. And what they don't realize is it's not all on them. So they can work to open up and change their module to say open for new maintainers, or I mean, maybe they need to obsolete it. I'm not saying inline entity form, but they. I think sometimes as developers we feel like, oh, it's all, the weight is all on us. But the reality is, the beauty of open source is the community. So we can look for maintainers. Hey, is someone else interested? Oh, this person seems to be really active in my issue queue, and I don't have time. Would you like to be a maintainer? Let's get a stable release. So, and I think most of us have probably taken on projects in the past to release secure, stable release before, but it really needs to be loved and cared for by someone that really is into that particular module and willing to work with it.
I do want to point out, I opened an issue on Inland Entity Form asking about their roadmap, and I missed it when I looked in the issue queue. There is a roadmap. There's a reason why that particular one isn't full release. There's a few kind of core functionality things that they do want to, really difficult core functionality things they want to get there. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Some of it's accountability, some of it's implied warranty, right? People expect more of something that's a 1.0 than an alpha or an RC. So maybe it's changing that implied burden or implied warranty, because like you said, it'd be nice to be able to install Commerce on a vanilla core and not have to make any changes to the minimum stability.
It's still, yeah, it's still, exactly. That was what I was thinking when, as you were talking, we would like to not have to change that ideally, right? There's a reason for that. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, and this also ties into what you said earlier, Nick, that you were working on a site that would upgrade to Drupal 10 as soon as the contrib modules are ready. And, making modules compatible with Drupal 10 is a lot like making full releases. It's a responsibility of the maintainer. This is open source software. Module maintainers are largely volunteers, and the community shares the responsibility for both of these, for updating to Drupal 10 and for helping to make secure releases. So if there's a module you need and you have the resources, ask how you can help. Can you help do code reviews for it? Can you sponsor the maintainer? Can you sponsor another developer to help the maintainer? And I see a lot of that going on. If you check out the Drupal 10 readiness channel in Drupal Slack, Drupal 10 was released long enough ago that currently that channel is devoted entirely to getting contrib modules to Drupal 10 releases. That same sort of activity can apply to modules that need full releases.
Okay, circling back to Drupal core again, you both have given some great tips on how to keep secure. Use core only, use only contrib. If you're writing custom code, make sure that you follow Drupal APIs, things like that. But let's say you have some functionality that you need to write that does require true custom code that's not using something, some Drupal API for something. How do you go about making sure that what you're writing or what you're using is secure? Or let's say you need to use a module that's not in a full release. How do you make sure that's secure? How do you make sure the stuff you're putting on your site is secure, as secure as can be?
So first of all, you didn't mention patching, and common practice, we all do it, but you have to recognize that applying a patch is fundamentally worse than using an alpha release, right? That patch has not been reviewed and accepted by the module's maintainers. So what I said at the start about custom code is that the same things that make for good code in general make for more secure code. So if you are writing custom code, if you are using an alpha version of a module, have someone review the code. Two sets of eyes are so much better than one. Mark mentioned automated tests, the same things you do to evaluate whether a module is high quality. If it doesn't have tests, you write them. And the last sort of squishy thing is sort of reputation. And if you've been involved with Drupal for a while, you know people that you can trust. We started off talking about the CrowdSec module. It was written by Jürgen Haas. That's a familiar name. That gives me some confidence in the module. The JWT module is maintained by Peter Wolinen. He's a member of the security team. I'm going to trust that one.
Yeah, I think to expand on some of that, like code reviews, 100% Benji, like just code reviews are important. And I remember projects in the past where we've done that very thing. Here's an unstable release, but we need the code. How can we push it forward? If it's in Drupal.org, I have a sense of responsibility to make that public, then that review public, post that in an issue queue. Some automated checks that we use, and I'll be glad to share a link, but in our media current Drupal project, we actually have just things set up, probably like a lot of folks do out there. We have PM security, Drush PM security run against code. We've got security review module. And one thing we integrated was the OWASP ZAP baseline scan, which is a mouthful to say, but But it will, so all these are tools to passively scan a code base and look for issues. And so that's like on top of what Benji mentioned, automated testing in, that Drupal.org relies on, that you would write for a module. So I think those are things that can help. But this is everything we're talking about, as you notice, is like, and the things Benji's talking about, it's layers of things you're doing throughout the entire stack and the processes to make things secure. There's just not one thing you could say, go do this thing and you're secure.
So, Mark, you just mentioned OWASP. Can you just tell everybody what that is?
Yeah. So OWASP is a group. It's the Open Web Application Security Project. Now you know why they go by OWASP, but they're a group, and one of the things I know them for, and I think a lot of folks do, is they have something they release every few years called the OWASP Top 10, and this is their top 10 web application security risks. And this is just absolutely valuable and crucial for all web developers. Even if I'm talking to the web developers out there who aren't really interested in security, you should probably spend time reading this academically, understand what these security issues mean so that you can recognize them. It's great for code reviews and things like that, but these are high level, just some examples that were released in 2021 are like, injection. So, and it used to be SQL injection. Now it's just injection because there's other types of injections other than just SQL.
Right. They combined a few topics. So cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgeries used to be separate topics, but now they're all included in injection.
You also, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, go for it, John.
I was going to say, you also, if you don't want to read it, I know that I've seen in the past some good LinkedIn learning videos on just covering the top 10. So
Benji also gave a talk at Nerd Summit a couple of weeks ago, so we'll give a link to that too.
Or that. I mean, Benji knows all about this stuff. One other thing I wanted to touch.
Let's come back to that.
Benji's aware of all of this stuff.
Benji's the foremost expert on OWASP in the Drupal community.
Let's just say no for now and come back to it.
But before you move on, John, I just wanted to mention one thing too about the baseline scan that Mark mentioned too. What that's doing is it's looking for these vulnerabilities in whatever code base you're configuring it to look at. So one of the advantages there is it will be searching all the dependencies of the dependencies of the dependencies if you configure it right. So when you're thinking about security, it's not just is Drupal secure, is Contrib secure, is my custom code secure, but also is everything that Drupal and Symfony is depending on secure, right? In general, the Drupal security team will catch that kind of stuff. And when there's a dependency update, that's one of the things that will trigger a Drupal core security update, right? But somebody has to find those, and these types of scans are one of those ways, outside of an actual compromise, these types of scans are sometimes one of those ways that they get found. So if you're looking to be a little bit more proactive, these kinds of scans are helpful. You do need to invest time into understanding them. There are false positives. They are pretty dense. They're pretty intimidating to look at, but they're a valuable tool in the tool belt if you're serious about it.
Although let's expand a bit on the false positives bit, because there are automated tools out there that will run scans, and people run them against Drupal sites, and they routinely come up with false positives. People then report them to the security team, which is a little bit annoying.
Although it's better to report something that you don't know about than to just assume something's a false positive, I think.
Absolutely. If you think there's a chance that something is a serious security issue, report it rather than don't report it. But just be aware that the automated scans are notorious for generating false positives. I'm sure there are people out there doing sort of deep analysis who will trim out the false positives. But if you just run a tool on a site, it'll come up with all sorts of warnings.
They also generate volume. Some of the commercial systems that Benji's talking about also generate just volumes of not just false positives, but just things that are more informational, but not really something that we're concerned about, or it's something we already know about in the community. There's already an issue for it.
So one thing I wanted to circle back to that Benji said earlier, and I actually never really thought about it, I guess, was patches and the fact that patches can open up security vulnerabilities. So I just wanted to clarify, Benji, are you suggesting that we don't use patches, or we double verify when we do use a patch that it's not doing something nefarious?
Yeah, I think we just as we can't only use full releases, stable releases, we can't avoid using patches on complex Drupal sites. But yes, don't just test a patch, also review it. And again, it's open source. We're all in this together. Think of what you can do. You can go to the Drupal.org issue and say, yeah, I tested this patch and it works. Or I tested it and I reviewed it. And I think this is a good candidate for being in the module. You'll get some direct benefit that when the patch is rolled into the module, it'll lower your maintenance burden. So you'll get some direct benefit. But you'll also be helping the whole community by getting that issue fixed rather than just patched. So along the same lines as if there are modules you need that don't have full releases, help them get there. Helping with patches, even if it's just posting on the issue, I tested it and it works, is a step in the right direction.
I would say too, under no circumstances should you use the diff link on an issue for your patch URL, because that diff updates when somebody pushes a new change, which means that you would be potentially allowing unreviewed code into your site. So if you're going to use a patch, the best practice is, and I've started doing this actually, I've kind of teased about this a little bit, but I've started just generating the patch and then storing it locally into a patches folder again. And then what I've been doing is in the composer.json, you have the key that's like, what are the words that say what this patch is fixing. I put the link to the project issue in that description so that I can find the amount of times that I've had to like find a patch in an issue again. I no longer have to do that because it's in the key. But the actual patch file is local, which also reduces the burden in Drupal.org, right? Because now I'm not hitting Drupal.org for that anymore. But I've been moving those local again. But yeah, you should be very aware of not, the diff link that shows up on the issue queue or for a fork or something is great for getting that patch at a point in time. But you should not use that in your workflow unless you're like just intermediately like testing something really quick. But you should under no circumstances be deploying with that link, because anybody who pushes to that issue fork rather, that diff will update, and the next time you deploy, you'll get that new code. So forgetting about security, that's very likely to just break your site too.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, best practice is to do it locally. Something
that Benji talked about, that review, don't just use a patch, but and test it, but actually review it. That's the status, when you feel like that patch is ready to be merged into the project, is RTBC, is reviewed and tested by the community. That's easy to overlook.
Yeah, sometimes I forget the R and sometimes I forget the T, but we need them both.
Yeah,
there you go. I feel like that's a T-shirt right there. Sometimes I forget the R, sometimes I forget the T. But
I am happy that people finally have settled on reviewed and tested by the community, because there was a long time where it was kind of ambiguous on whether people meant that or they meant ready to be committed, which kind of implies the former. But reviewed and tested by the community, that little tagline makes people double check, which is
It's more clear.
Yeah.
Mark, at the beginning of the show, in your intro, I believe, Nick mentioned Garter. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that. So it's Garter, the Drupal security distribution. What does that do?
Yeah, so Garter's been around since D6 timeframe, and so it's probably less of a distribution nowadays, as distributions are sort of going away over time, in lieu of recipes and modules. So when we talk about modern Garter, there's the Garter core module, which is really now much better, because from D8 plus and D8 on, Garter Core is now, instead of having its own profile that installs, we rely on Core profile, and you just add the module, which is just a composer wrapper, and it. So what makes Garter Core, or Garter in general, interesting is it's not just a collection of security modules, it's a collection also of the config that goes with those modules that comply with, they help you, with PCI and FERPA with universities, and, other types of regulatory concerns. So it's been reviewed by folks that know these things, and contribute back patches and ideas towards it. So it's pretty neat. You can install it and get an enhanced security for Drupal effectively.
Can you dig into, so one of the things that I'm always curious about when it comes to these types of kind of specialized knowledge domains is, how do you research and validate that information? So you mentioned Garter helps with PCI compliance or HIPAA compliance, I imagine, those kinds of things. Like, how do you make decisions on what configuration makes it into Garter, and make sure that it's doing what you're expecting it to do, right? How do you validate that?
So, automated testing is a way that we've done this in the past, and so we have a GitHub repo that builds the profile, and we can run tests there. But really, if someone contributes and says, "Hey, this solves this point in ISO 27001 for our group," and I think we're beyond that level now in ISO, but it's but if they submit and say this solves that, then we just want to see that we have some information associated with it that validates it. Like, give us some copy from some text and some web references that show that, and then have the community basically validate it. We're careful in the Garter group maintainers to not just go alone and make decisions and just do things. We like to at least have some community validation, and so we also have a Garter channel in Drupal Slack, and some of that can happen there. But yeah, that's a good question. It's real important. And I think another interesting topic about these domain specific type areas that you mentioned, Nick, is we like to frequently give Garter what we call a haircut. And sometimes these modules can get big and bloated, and you have lots of stuff that people don't want or don't need. So we'll simply say what needs to come out. That's as important as what needs to go into these things. And so we'll with a major release coming up, we'll say, hey, let's just drop some of these things that we don't think are as important now, or there's better modules to solve them, that sort of thing. And one last thing I'll say about Garter that I'm okay with 100%, like as a maintainer. I think a lot of people use Garter academically. I think they'll go, what does Garter have going on with this, password policy, or, whatever, what are they doing there? And they'll look at it to get ideas, and then they'll just configure their own sites and projects with some of those settings, or at least they're more informed. So I think that's great to look at this. That's why it's another benefit of open source is academically, you can review the code and get ideas. Nice.
Speaking of how we can get involved with security, we've been talking a little bit about the Drupal security team today. And I wonder, Mark, if you can give us an idea of what the Drupal security team is and what does it do?
I'm going to probably let Benji speak to this since Benji's
Okay.
on the team. Now I know a good bit about the team and work with
Mark,
the
tell us
team.
what Benji does.
Well, again, I'll have to let Benji answer
Yeah.
that. But no, seriously, I have a lot of respect for the Drupal security team, and I will just say this as Benji gets ready to do his thing and talk about it. We are, if you're just a Drupal person mostly, and you're just involved with Drupal as an open source project, I have to say, take some time, look around, listen out there at other projects. We have something in Drupal very special with the security team that not every large open source project has. And I will also say that other projects that have security teams now have looked at the Drupal security team and how that works and works well and used it as a model to build theirs. But I'll turn it over to you, Benji, to talk about the team.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the primary responsibility of the Drupal security team is to handle information confidentially. So if there is a security vulnerability in Twig or Symfony, they trust us to handle that responsibly and to coordinate the release of that information along with updated versions of our software. If someone finds a security problem with a contrib module or with Drupal core, they can report it securely to the team. There are a few ways to do that. One way is if you're looking at the issue queue for a module, there should be a link to report a security issue, which is different from the link for just creating a new issue for the module. So we handle information confidentially. We manage the process of releasing on Wednesdays, generally between 12 and 5 Eastern time. So people know what to expect and they know what to do to keep their sites secure. So that's our primary responsibility. We spend, I guess the team itself has primary responsibility for Drupal core. So we not only coordinate, but also do a lot of the work on fixing the problems when they come up in Drupal core. Not contrib modules. The module maintainers have the primary responsibility. And that comes back to what we were saying earlier about the responsibility of having a full release. One of your responsibilities as a module maintainer is that if you have a full release of your module and the security team gets in touch with you, you're responsible for replying, and we'll work with you and help you fix the problem. And if you can't or won't, we will remove your module from Drupal.org, or we'll declare it unsupported.
And
Is
to
it
clarify,
weird as Benji was describing that? I had the Cops theme song playing in my head, like bad boy, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when the security team contacts you? No, nobody else.
no. To clarify, Benji, so if I'm maintaining a module, there's a security issue, you'll contact me. It's my responsibility to update it. But if it's really technical and I don't know how, the security team will certainly advise and give, help work through some of those technical answers, right? But they're not going to just make, swoop in and make that change. Is that
right? If you have some small module and you're not a super technical developer and it's easy to fix, yeah, we'll go in and fix it for you. But the responsibility is yours. We'll do what we can to help. But our primary responsibility is the coordination and the managing the confidential information for contrib modules.
okay?
And another aspect of the security team is to educate the Drupal community. So what I'm doing right now is part of my job on the security team. I have a presentation that I'm slowly expanding and presenting at different Drupal camps. I think I started early last year, and 4 camps last year, 2 camps so far this year. Mid-camp is coming up next week. I'll be giving another version of the talk. So, so educating the public about security best practices is another part of our job.
I wanted to kind of give a testimonial too, or actually a couple of testimonies with the security team as well, right? One of the things that you guys do as well is respond quickly. I mean, I had a client that, did one of those external authentication scan things and came back with a couple of findings. One of them was something that looked like a security issue for me. I created a security issue for it, and within 4 hours, I had a response. And it turns out that it's something that the Drupal community has decided isn't a security issue, and there's a contrib module to remediate it if you need to. And that's
Is that user enumeration?
Yeah, I'm sure you get so many reports about that, but yeah, like a lot of people don't know this either. But you can find out there's a way to get valid usernames for a Drupal site, because you get a different response if it's a valid username versus an invalid username if you try to visit the either log in or visit the user page, I think.
It's in Carter.
Okay. Yeah, username enumeration prevention is a module that will help prevent that. The other thing too is I know that there's been other situations where something has been found in a third-party library like Guzzle. It's been reported. The Guzzle team fixed it, and before the end of Wednesday, like it's reported like early Wednesday morning, and before the end of the day Wednesday, Drupal core has a security update because it happened to be the third Wednesday, and Guzzle is now updated as well. So the team is definitely quick. Now, my next question.
Yeah, we had to scramble for that. Guzzle was not
I imagine.
high on our popularity list last year.
Yeah, that happened twice that I know of. So this next question can go two ways, and I'd like to get an answer both ways, but I'll start with this. So how does the security team find issues? And what I mean by that is, for example, something you'll see very often, or not very often, because Drupal actually rarely has security releases. It's maybe once a quarter or so that core has something. When there is a security release for core, very often there will be several contrib modules updated for something very similar. So for example, core might have an update that says, hey, there was some check that wasn't happening properly. Media thumbnails are available to people that shouldn't have access to them, right? And then there'll be 3 contrib modules updated with almost the exact wording. So my question is, if somebody reports an issue, part of the security coverage is finding the contrib modules that do similar things. How does the security team find the modules that are doing the same thing that core is doing? Do you have a tool that helps with that? Is it just knowledge? Do you search them individually?
Yeah, so first of all, Sam Mortensen, who's a former member of the security team, has talked about how he finds security issues. And he just thinks of code patterns and he searches for them with grep. And he's really good at that. And we do pretty much the same thing. I think Damien McKenna, one member of the team, has a hard drive with just a ton of contrib modules on it. So he can just search locally. If a module is on Drupal.org, then it's in our GitLab instance, and we can use the GitLab search.
Okay.
There's one site which is unfortunately hosted in Russia. It's a .ru extension, but it lets you do sort of limited regular expression searches of all Drupal contrib modules. And we're a little nervous about using that, but that's one way. So so if you know what you're looking for, which is the hard part, then you can search for it.
Yeah, that site seems problematic, not because the responses, but if somebody is running that site as a way to see like, hey, what's the Drupal security team curious about? They can use that kind of as advance notice.
That's part of the reason we're nervous about using it.
flipping that question around, because like I said, I had two ways that this question could go, and I'm curious about both of them. The other way is, does the security team rely mostly on community reports for things, or are you sometimes actively looking for things as well? Or is it like when a module gets a new release, does a security team member then look at that for all the known kind of security?
No. The security team is mostly reactive. People report problems to us. I mean, we're all active developers, and we may run across things ourselves, but the team's responsibility is not to discover the vulnerabilities, but to coordinate them
And remediate them.
and especially if they're Drupal core, to fix them.
Interesting.
Let's put a little bit of a finer point on it, right? So the security team's taking issues from the community, like, hey, there's a problem here. You're going and looking at core, you're looking at maybe modules that are using kind of the same sorts of code snippets. Are you actually reviewing compromised code and sites individually, or is this more of just a kind of a global or a Drupal core module based sort of thing?
No, your site is hacked. It's your problem. I'm sorry.
That's fair.
It's just too much for a volunteer team to handle.
Right.
So we provide education. We'll give you advice, but we can't review individual sites that have been hacked.
My
John,
question.
sorry, don't store your password on a Post-it note. That'll prevent your site from getting hacked. Go.
Yeah.
Nick.
So sorry. My question was more, because I put that question in. My question was less about having the security team help to remediate an individual site, because I don't think that that's your mandate. And like you said, that it's a volunteer team. But it was more like, if somebody reports an issue that they found because their site was compromised, it's not because, a lot of these security things that are reported are like, I ran a WASP, I found this thing, or I reviewed this code, found this thing, right? It's before something has happened, and there's time to remediate that. But, in the instance that, hey, my site was hacked, but I was up to date on everything, I don't use custom code, I don't use very many contributed modules, and which this hasn't happened in a long time, but something happened, and you're trying to figure out is there any detective work to try to figure out, well, how did they get in, to see if it's something Drupal related, or maybe server related, or something else, or is that like you just investigate based on discussions?
Are you asking if they
that.
validate if it's a real issue?
No, because of course they do, but I'm wondering, like, how far does that investigation go before?
Like, do we do the forensics and figure out how your site was breached? No.
Yeah, no, okay. I mean, that makes sense. I was just curious.
I mean, that's about as hard as remediating it.
But I would say
we can't do that.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'm just going to say you can hire teams that are qualified to do that kind of thing, though, and I do recommend that as part of a security plan for any organization, is to have things like that on the ready, so that it's not if you get hacked, it's when. And I'm not talking more institutional, like network. Yeah, it's not necessarily the Drupal site, but possibly. But like, have a plan, have a security plan. So that's one of the things that we talk about a lot around Drupal security, is just have a plan internally, so who would we call if we need that. Because as developers, we don't know everything about security, from like the network level and the infrastructure level of the hosting providers, which also brings up the fact, talk to your hosting providers. If you're with somebody, like we use Acquia and Pantheon a lot at Media Current, we open tickets. If we have any inkling of a security incident, we'll just open a ticket with them, just saying, look, we want to be transparent. We're seeing this. We're not sure what's happening. And it's been super helpful to have that in the past. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth, well, maybe not clarifying, but just going back to Nick's question, right? So Benji, from what I'm hearing, you're taking the report of the security issue. Hey, my site had this problem. Here's how I reproduced it. Here's why I think it's a security issue. Security team's validating. Okay, let's reproduce it. Yes, it is a security issue. No, it's not a security issue. Here's why, and moving on. They're not going like, hey, let's look at your server logs. Let's dig into the nitty gritty of why you did that. That's on the person submitting the report to kind of do that investigation.
That's right.
I want to point out too that I think that's some of the enormous value that the Drupal security team has kind of at a wide level is that several of the members work for the big Drupal hosting platform. So if there is a widespread Drupal issue, that investigation is going to happen in those organizations, and somebody on the team is probably going to be part of that, and then they can help remediate that. So it's not like that investigation is never going to happen with people close to the security team is knowledge. But I was just curious if somebody's like outside of one of those hosts, if any of that happened. And like I said, I didn't expect that answer would be yes, because like you said, it's his volunteer team, and
Nick,
the mandate really is helping with that communication and remediating core and contrib. But
Nick's asking for his locally hosted Bitwarden.
I do not locally host Bitwarden. I use their service.
Speaking
which, about the voluntary nature of the security team, can you tell us how somebody might get involved with being part of the security team?
Yeah, there's a link. I've put it in the show notes with the steps involved, and there are a lot of requirements there, but it's like applying for any job. Maybe you don't quite check off all the boxes. It's still worth starting the process. And if you have an interest in joining the security team, we'd love to talk to you. And if you don't check off all the boxes, we can work with you to help you get there. I kind of think this isn't official. This is just my opinion. That if there's someone out there with a particular skill, like you're a great public communicator, and you look at me on this podcast and think I could do a better job, well, probably there are a lot of people out there who could. But if you not only think that, but also have the time and interest to volunteer, and you want to join the security team to help spread the word and educate the public, or if you're a great project manager and you would love to contribute to the security team, reach out to us. You start off by sending an email to security@drupal.org, and we can start the process. Once we've decided you've checked enough of the boxes, you've worked on public security issues, you've maybe maintained a module and it has security clearance. You've worked on a certain number of issues in Drupal core or the top 30, I think, contributed modules. Once you've made the application and filled the requirements, you can be made a provisional member of the team. And that's the stage I was at last year in February or so. And then there's an indefinite period where you're sort of tried out, make sure you follow the procedures, make sure you understand how to treat things confidentially. And for me, it was slightly less than a year. And actually, Dave Long and I both became full members of the security team in the first few days of January of this year. So I'm in great company there. He's a terrific asset to the team and to Drupal in general. Yeah, and there's plenty of work to do. We would like to have more members. We'd like to have a more diverse team. And if you have the interest, if you have the time, which is hard. That's what held me back for a long time. Go ahead and apply, and we'll talk to you.
So shifting gears a bit, one of the things that I'm always curious about when we get these security notices too is what's the process for writing those security notices? Like, how do you decide what the severity of a breach is, or I should say breach, the severity, like the CV level? How do you decide how much detail? Because obviously you want to give enough detail to let people know if it's applicable, but you don't want to actually share like, here's a step-by-step guide on how to compromise sites that haven't updated this yet. Who is one person responsible for that, and the team kind of contributes, or like, how does that piece work? I've always been curious.
Oh, let me think. I have to be careful not to say too much. We, if you look at the security risk level, it has this sort of code in these 5 different categories.
Yes.
Like how serious is it? What's the impact? And what sort of access is needed in order to exploit it? Like, can an anonymous user do it, or do you already have to have some permissions on the site? So there are these 5 different categories, and we sort of agree, and sometimes it takes a little debate. Is this a level 1, 2, or 3 on each of those categories? And then the overall number is generated based on that score, or based on those choices.
So basically, Nick, they have a rubric and they're not sharing it with you.
But we do share it. The every security announcement will have access control, anonymous or not.
Sure.
So the exact formula of how that turns into a 15 or a 25, I don't know what it is.
Okay.
and even if I did, I wouldn't share it with you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Fair enough.
So in closing, as we're wrapping things up here, Benji, obviously the security team is a very dedicated group of folks. If you guys need hype men, Mark and Nick sound like they're up for the job. I think you guys are, you folks are doing great work. But I'm wondering, like, how can people in general help the security team?
So one thing is to educate yourself on secure practices for managing your site, for writing secure code. Keep security in mind as you work with your website, whatever your role is, whether you're a project manager or a developer or a salesperson. Keep security in mind. Second thing is, just like with any open source software, contribute, help people move things along. Try to get those patches reviewed and committed. Try to get full releases out. There is a special issue tag for public security hardenings, things that don't seem severe enough that they have to be handled confidentially, but would improve security. Look at that issue queue, see if there are things you can help with there. And then there's the queue of projects waiting for review. So this used to be the requirement before you could host a project on Drupal.org. It's now the requirement before you can opt in to security coverage for your module. And first of all, it's been problematic in the past. There have been times where projects just waited for months before they would get a review. So if you can help with that. And furthermore, some of these are written by experienced developers. They're already in great shape. You review it, you say, this is great, it passes. Some of them are written by beginners and they make beginners' mistakes. And it's a great way you can help help those developers learn to do better, and help the Drupal community.
I want to say very clearly, one thing I know will help the security team. Besides, you should report if you have a security concern. You should report it, but do not put it in Slack and do not report it in the public queue. Make sure you use the security issue queue because it is private. You do not want to expose potential security issues in the public sphere.
Thank you. And also there's an official answer to the question of how I can help, and I've put the link. That's also in the show notes.
Oh, yeah.
And before we close out here, Mark, just curious if folks wanted to get involved with Garter and help you guys out, is there a way that they could do that?
Yeah. So I think the Garter core issue queue is probably the best place to go to with modern Drupal, Drupal 8 and beyond. I should say 9 and beyond since 8's not supported. Also, the Garter Contrib Garter channel in Drupal Slack is a great place to talk in there. So and just ask how what needs to be done, because we got things that need to be reviewed. We got some decisions to make. We are ironically, based on our previous conversation about minimum stability settings for Drupal 10, we are working through with some of the modules that we use currently to take care of some stable release situations to really get Garter to fully support Drupal 10. So that's funny how that came back around, but that would be great. Love to have any help.
That reminds me of the situation with the jQuery update module, where you can't have a secure site without having an up-to-date version of jQuery, but the module itself for a long time was in an alpha release. And they finally came out with a full release just within the last few months, I think.
Well, thank you, Mark and Benji, for joining us. This has been a great show. Learned a lot about how the security team works and did a lot to think about. I love the hygiene analogy around security. And Mark, I think you pointed out to me that a lot of the security stuff is very similar to accessibility, right? It takes consensus from a group of experts and takes some research and thought, but it's a group activity.
And it's never finished.
Yes.
That's something else they have in common.
Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our show hosts or other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
And you can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter for show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose to become a patron. And with that, you will get a feed of the full show. We have almost 200 episodes right now with the before and after show. Well, Mark, as we close out, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, had any questions, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, you can reach out to me through contact form on Drupal.org. I go by Shrop on Drupal.org, Twitter @Shrop. Those are probably the easiest ways. I'm in Drupal Slack, Shrop. So it'd be great. Thank you.
And Benji, how about you?
Probably the best way is Drupal Slack, and unless something needs to be confidential, I prefer doing it in public channels rather than DMs, just so that other people can benefit from the discussion.
And Jordan, how about you?
On Drupal.org, I'm CO Badger, so connect with me there or using the contact form, CO Badger.
And John, how about you?
I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org @John Picozzi, and you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Have a good one, everyone.
See you guys
Thank
next
you.
week.